I want to wrap up where we left off last time. With Critchley, I just have a few more things to say. There's a number of slides. I'm not going to go through all of them. The slides, remember, are there for your benefit. You don't need to write down everything that's on the slides. But you want to get mostly what I say about the slides. I've got a lot of stuff I want to cover today so that we have time. My goal is to get some group work, a quiz on the ninth, next class after we get through James. So I want to get through enough of Peirce today such that we're able to do that. Well, let me remind us where we were last time. We were looking at Simon Critchley, and there he is. That's what he looked like. It's helpful to know what the philosophers look like, so you know why they thought the way they did. This dude looks cool. He is cool. He's the manifestation of cool. He's written on a lot of stuff, from humor to epistemology to contemporary philosophy, of course. I think he started the blog, The Opinionator, the Philosopher's Stone, I think it's called, on the New York Times. It's a New York Times blog. Most blogs I'm a little bit leery of. This one's not bad. We'll look at a couple of other philosophers who've actually been on that. But just a reminder of the things that we're looking at, the difference between knowledge and wisdom, and the way that he's dividing it. And we don't have to agree with him. He's not stating necessarily something as fact. We'll come back to later on what fact is. He's giving his account of a distinction between two threads of philosophy within the contemporary society. He's looking at it in terms of analytic philosophy, professional philosophy, Anglo-American philosophy that is perhaps to a fault concerned with, committed to formal logic, concerned with and committed to the scientific method. And when I say to a fault, he's worried that it leads, that the assumption that science can answer all of our meaningful, relevant questions can lead to... That threw me off. It's a shirt there. You have to. I don't want to make you get up, but it's a Sasquatch, but really it's the Cookie Monster. It's a great, and it's, does that say believe? That's nice. Wear that again when we get to William James. I'm sorry to call you out, but you can't wear shirts like that and not be called out for that. It's a fantastic shirt. But you totally threw me off. What was I saying? Science. So later on, everyone just walk around and get a look before you leave today. So to a fault, it's weird to think of the scientific method as taking it too far. What's that called? What's the negative that he talks about? What is it? Scientism. Scientism is different. I actually have that in the slide. Scientism is different than relying on science. Scientism is a negative, has a negative connotation. And I think even Peirce, as we'll see, it looks like it's pronounced Peirce, but it's Peirce, might get a little bit close to that. He touches that. He gets to the point where, is he advocating for scientism? Is he advocating for this notion that science can and eventually, ultimately will answer all of our questions? Or is it the case, as Critchley wants to put it, scientific philosophy, as Peirce seems to be pushing? So I'm combining both of these discussions today. Peirce seems to be pushing philosophy as we're going to see, the philosophy of science. But science, what does it do? It informs us. And his concern is that philosophy should do more than that. And he starts off with a reading with, philosophy should form human beings, not just inform them. I thought that was clever. And there's a lot of Platonic stuff if you're interested in ancient philosophy as well. Professionalization of philosophy seems to offer knowledge. The question is, does it do anything else? And he starts with that story about him at a cocktail party or whatever, and somebody asks him, what does he do? And he says he's into philosophy. And then he gets the question, what's the meaning of life? And he laughs that off, and we make fun of it. And contemporary philosophers, I would say most of the philosophers I know and worked with and studied under, if you ask them, do you work in, questions like, what's the meaning of life? Is that your focus? Most of them, that's not the case. And I would say that's probably not the case even if you're a continental philosopher, if you are an existentialist, a phenomenologist. You have issues. You have people dealing with real-world scenarios, dealing with ethics, of course, dealing with issues of oppression, either from the analytic or continental tradition. But the broader question of meaning and purpose, that one seems less relevant today. It's harder, maybe it's just because it's harder, to publish a 20 to 30 page paper on it, which is pretty much, that's the ideal. You want to get a journal, you want to get a paper in a journal in philosophy, either come up with an amazing thought experiment that you can write out in like 2 or 3 pages, which we'll see some of those examples in this class, and they're hard to do, or churn out 20, 30 page papers on a very narrow, specific issue that no one else has written about. And let me tell you how upsetting it can be when you think, oh, I got it. Nobody's touched this idea. This is totally new. This is all mine. I'm going to publish it. People are going to love me. Or just read it at least, which amounts to the same thing, by the way. If somebody reads it, that means it's like being loved. And then you start doing research, which you already know. You start to sense it. Somebody's already done this. Somebody's already made this point. Has anyone ever heard of A-leafs as opposed to B-leaf? You all have heard of that from my intro class.
That's right.
An A-leaf, remind us what an A-leaf is, because actually with Peirce it might be relevant.
It was something where I believe it, but then my actions kind of say I don't believe it.
Right.
I forgot the specific examples that were given.
Yeah. Walking over a glass enclosure.
Like you're going to be scared, but you know you're supported, but you're still breathing.
I'm sorry, they're honking at us. You're walking on it as if you're afraid. It's look, oh my God, this is... But if somebody asks you, do you believe it's safe? Do you believe it's safe? You'd say, yeah, why else would I be walking on it? I clearly believe it. But you're acting as if you didn't believe it was safe. So the philosopher Tamar Gendler coins a term. Here's where you get in, and she's an analytic philosopher. She uses the creativity of conceptual creation in this case. She coins a new term, which gives us a new concept, which enables us to explain an otherwise inexplicable scenario. Psychology doesn't have a concept for this, a term for this. What's going on when we act as if we're afraid when we're really not? We don't believe it, but our bodily reactions seem to imply that we do. And I thought, oh my goodness, maybe this will help explain why people laugh at racist jokes that they don't believe in the content of. Why did you laugh at that racist joke? That means you're racist. No, I'm only acting as if I were racist. I A-leave the content of the joke, but I don't believe it. And I thought, yes, nobody's written that. Because that's what you have to do. You have to get so damn narrow. You can't write on the philosophy of religion. You can't write on the philosophy of mind or philosophy of humor, whatever it might be. You need to focus narrowly. And by the way, somebody had already written on that. That doesn't mean you can't do it. You can't do anything with it. It just means you then have to narrowly tailor your view that doesn't overlap with somebody else's.
I wanted to ask if that would kind of come into play with like when someone like vacates you or you flinch and you're like, ow, before they actually even make contact with you, or is that entirely too neurological?
When you a reflex?
If someone, but not even
Yeah.
just the reflex of pulling away, the actual action of saying like I am experiencing pain, like ow. When you like put your hand in a cold water and you pull away so quick because you think it's hot.
Yeah.
And then you touch it again, and it's freezing. Or like your friend goes to punch you and you're like ow, and he didn't actually make contact because he missed. Or is that
What
too
kind of
neurological?
friend tries to punch you, first of all?
A good friend, a close friend.
You like 2 for flinching game?
Yeah, exactly.
I
Except
hated
like they
that.
miss your whole arm, but you still go out. Is that too neurological, or does that be under the same thing? Like I knew you weren't gonna actually do it, but like I just thought too quick about it.
Well, that's a good question. Too neurological is an interesting way of putting it, because it's probably prior to conscious belief, because you're reacting. You don't have time for a conscious reaction. Did that person hit me? And also, am I in pain? Pain doesn't work that way. It hurts.
That's right.
And how weird it would be if your friend swung at you, you said ow, and then they said, you know what, you're not in pain. Number one, they hit you and then claimed you're not in pain, or they swung at you. What kind of friend is this?
Great friends.
Rethink.
Come on.
Rethink. Anyway, I'll talk about that when we get to the philosophy of mind section and consciousness, because that's relevant. And it's similar to this, because A-leaves are prior to consciousness. They're automatically triggered, and so there are connections there. I'm just bringing that up as an example of what professional philosophers do. And it's tough. There's so many more people writing now. There's so much more stuff that's being published. And there's the publish or perish nonsense, such that you don't get tenure unless you publish. That's the case in most universities. Luckily, they don't have that issue here. And that means people need to go out and they become like little worker bees. And sometimes something great comes out of it. I'm not discounting, and nor is Critchley. discounting the role of professionalized philosophy. But there is a concern that it only gives us information. And information is not the same thing as wisdom. We've got Google, don't we? And we could Wikipedia things, or Bing things, or DuckDuckGo things. That's the one that doesn't take any information from you? Is that right? DuckDuckGo? I don't believe it, though. Does the scientific conception of the world... I want you to consider these questions related to your reading of Peirce. I want to jump to Peirce in a moment. Does the scientific conception of the world eradicate the need for an answer to the question of the meaning of life? Or as he puts it, does the body of knowledge require the appendectomy of wisdom? I hope you looked at that, read that, and thought, that's really nice. This question is, does the scientific conception of the world... This is page 3. In a certain extreme view, it does. And some philosophers might argue that all questions must either be answerable, notice all questions, through empirical inquiry. That's, think of empiricism as science, as experimentation, like in a laboratory or something like that. Or rejected as spurious. Or in the case of Peirce, as we'll see in a moment, and later logical positivists, which we'll explain with A.J. Ayer in a couple of readings or a couple of weeks, we should want to eliminate those kinds of questions. In fact, maybe even metaphysics as such, a term that we'll define in more detail. Those questions are, in a sense, meaningless if they cannot be answered empirically. I want you to consider that. What does that mean? If we get to that with respect to meaning, can we make sense of a scientific understanding of the world? Can our sciences give us a sense of meaning? And maybe you're content with this. Maybe we can accumulate enough facts about the world, and therein lies our understanding and our meaning and purpose. What's the point of biology? It's to survive. That's pretty clear. That's the goal, if you want to think of it in terms of goal, purpose, end, or telos in the Greek sense, telos. Evolutionary biology, propagate the species. That means sex. Genetics, propagate your genetic materials. That also means sex. Sociology, propagate your mimetic materials. Probably has to do with sex there too. But mimetics is in contrast to genetics. Right? Genes pass on in a particular way, and memes pass on in a similar way, but memes are sociological ideas, cultural ideas. They spread much quicker than genetic material, I guess you could say, insofar as evolution is concerned. The term meme, I think, was coined in the 1970s, late 70s, by Charles Dawkins, Richard Dawkins. Psychology, seek pleasure, avoid pain. Economics, accumulate more than everyone else. Mathematics, I don't know about that. What's the meaning of life for a mathematician?
I can answer this. Be number one.
I feel like it's be the last one, like the last number.
Oh, count to the end. I did. I got to the end.
The first person to count to the end, so never mind.
Count to the end. How does one do that?
It has to be something.
That's actually a joke. I don't know what the meaning of life is for mathematicians.
It's just a
Finding a
vague
really
equation.
elegant theory.
It's to be right.
Yeah, that's it.
Is it? Maybe. I don't know. Ask your math teacher. What's the meaning? What's the meaning of life according to mathematicians? And also, what are numbers? What's the deal? Going with that. I should have told you to do that the first day. What's the deal with numbers? Are they invented or do we discover them? Am I right? I'm serious. Do we invent them or are they discovered? Mathematicians seem to do both. They seem to invent theories that kind of latch on to reality, and in some cases, they're discovering things. Combination of the two of those, and I think that's relevant. It's okay.
Wait, what was the economics one?
Oh, I don't
Sorry.
remember.
Accumulate more
Yeah.
than everyone else?
Yeah, I don't know if that's
I didn't
economics.
know if that was also a joke, or...
Kind of it is. Economics is not really about that. Economics is studying systems, markets, and how choices lead to all sorts of benefits and negatives. But of course, once you get into negatives, benefits, and value, it's not clear that you're doing pure science there. And so economics and philosophy are very interestingly interconnected in many ways. If you're into economics, there's a great podcast. I don't normally advertise podcasts, but I forgot what it is. Econ Talk with an economist. just econ talk. His name escapes me, but he has Philosophers On. It's quite good. I first heard of it from the Partially Examined Life, which is a podcast, and I think I have that on your syllabi as something to check out if you drive long distances. Listen to that. It's very good. We already did that last time, and here's what I wanted to get to. So here are the two extremes, and the two negatives of the two extremes. Too much emphasis on pure logic and scientific method leads to scientism, the assumption that we can answer all of the relevant, meaningful questions with this one approach. Quantifiable, logical, and in some cases, abstract thinking, universalizing thinking. On the other hand, we'll see the concerns with continental philosophy, that is what we'll primarily focus on, existentialism. There's an overemphasis on the rejection of science, on, in some cases, the rejection of logic and reason, and relying, perhaps again, overly relying upon what we might be called the subjectivity, the subjective nature of truth. We'll see that in particular with a fellow named Soren Kierkegaard. And a little bit with Nietzsche as well. So obscurantism, scientism, those are the two paths that are negatives that we ought to be concerned about. And a lot of what we're going to be looking at is, with this question of enlightenment in the background, is there a way of avoiding both of these extremes? And it's interesting that the first systematic philosophical view we're looking at is squarely in the contemporary tradition, and it is one of the very few philosophies to originate in the United States, and that's pragmatism, that ultimately derives from the reading you had for today with Charles Peirce, which influences William James, and James then popularizes Peirce. Peirce, without James, there is no pragmatism, even though Peirce invented it. I'll describe that later. And then the influence on other people, like James Dewey in particular. We'll see the influence on Richard Rorty later on. There was a question, yeah.
What's confusion of language in obscurantism?
That is itself obscure.
Okay.
Obscurantism. It is being unnecessarily confusing, opaque, using language that is not clear, is not concise, is not precise. In logic, we want to avoid ambiguity. We want to avoid vagueness. We want to be very, very clear. We want to be able to say things. Premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, here's how my conclusion follows from my premises. When I'm giving a narrative, a first-person experiential take, or sometimes called phenomenological take, it's hard, if not impossible, to put that into standard logical form, and perhaps even in everyday common language may be insufficient. And so the connection between poetry and continental philosophy is an interesting one. There's more of the concept of poesis, which means creating, where you're not constrained by rules of logic, rules of syntax, rules of language, and so forth. And so there's a lot of playfulness there, but that playfulness can go too far, to the point where, what the hell are you saying? I don't understand any of this. You read through all of Derrida's work and you realize, I don't know what I've just done. Wish I could have those. She can have those 10 years back. Yes.
So do they not care if people have different meanings for different words?
Oh no, certainly they do. But that does happen. That happens in all sorts of disciplines. In fact, it happens in schools now regarding critical thinking, for instance. Different disciplines seem to use that term differently. In logic, we have a term called deduction. It seems to be used differently in mathematics. Contemporary textbooks in mathematics have a different sense of what deduction is than in logic, which is an odd notion, since mathematics, at least going back to Bertrand Russell and Gottlob Frege, who we'll look at, is interconnected, if not grounded, with logic. And so, yes, they do care, and oftentimes they'll take the time to explain and define their terms. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll leave them purposely vague. And we'll see perhaps why that might be.
Is it kind of like how... Who's the last person you read? Peirce? Is it kind of like how Peirce and some philosophers, they say the word logic, but they don't mean the same kind of logic that other, when we say the word or reasoning?
Reasoning is broad. So logic is specifically the science of argumentation. How premises can lead to other premises, how to make inferences, how to avoid invalid and unsound
So like
deductions.
but like that's like for when you're thinking like philosophically, but like for normal people who are just going through the day making decisions and
They're mistaken. They're using the term valid incorrectly in the technical sense. In the everyday language, I'm not going to call out somebody, by the way, who says, oh, that's a valid point. Oh, really? Do you mean it's a deductive argument that's truth preserving? Is that what you mean by valid? Because then you're just a dick. But there is a lexicon that's specific to logic, which applies to argumentation as such. So when I make an argument in standard logical form, I have premises that support my claims, and we'll go through this a little bit more later. That type of argument should be applicable to any field. I make an argument about history. Here's why the Civil War was actually about slavery and not just about states' rights issue, or something like whatever it might be. Here are my reasons. I'm relying upon inductive inferences, or causal argument, or an argument from authority, or generalization, and so forth. That carries over, and it should. And if the historian calls their reasoning deductive when in fact it's inductive, then the historian is wrong. And so too is the philosopher if they make that mistake. Yeah.
For scientism, is it, so like, are they saying that science can possibly, like, or will we eventually get to the point where it has a complete account for everything? Or is it like, as it is right now? Like,
Eventually.
eventually?
Yeah.
Is that necessarily a negative though? Like, because they can still, like, I don't know, I'm thinking of it like in terms of like, just like ignorance and everything else, but like if that, I don't know.
No, it's a great question, because Peirce would... So what you're doing is, in a way, following on Peirce's idea that eventually we will converge. He calls it a principle of convergence. We will eventually converge on beliefs that cannot be doubted. There is no way of genuinely doubting them, which I'm going to get to. You'll find a way. We'll find that there's collective agreement, and it's only science, the scientific method, that can get us to that kind of collective convergence. We're not there yet, and science has a history of being mistaken, but it's also the best mode, as we'll see, because it's self-correcting. It improves. Our claims are tentative, they are provisional, but we have improved, he thinks. And in fact, our very conception of truth, based in empirical scientific grounding, is an improvement on the previous understandings of what truth is. However, the response against scientism is, well, let's imagine, and I don't recall if Critchley addresses this in the reading you had, the section I gave you. But consider this thought experiment. It's a variation on something called Laplace's demon. You may have recalled that. I don't know, actually, if I mentioned it in the intro for some of you. It's a thought experiment in which we imagine a demon who has, in this case, I'll tailor it to your question, all of the scientific facts possible. Any scientific fact that there is, this demon has possession of it, knows everything there is relevantly. With respect to quantum mechanics, with respect to all of the particles and the neuronal states and the astronomical facts, whether or not the universe is expanding or not, whether or not there's a multiverse, whether or not their string theory is accurate, and so on. This demon knows all of that. Would anything be missing if you were like this demon? Would you have an understanding then of purpose, of meaning? Would your life be meaningful because of that full, if you want, scientific omniscience? If you think so, then scientism is in fact not a negative. If you think something is inherently missing, even with all the scientific facts, then you have a concern about scientism. Do you see? Does that thought experiment make sense?
Good.
Would the demon have possession of experiences from other people? Like how someone else sees a specific color or something like that? Like that specific experience?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Can you quantify that?
If, without begging questions here, if your perception of green, what is this? Blue, if your perception of blue can be wholly explicable in quantifiable terms, scientific terms, materialistic terms, then by hypothesis the demon knows what it is like for you to see blue. But now this is a huge question, one that I can't address now because it's too big, but I started it, sorry. But we'll have to wait for a fuller understanding of it October 2nd. Yeah, I'm serious, October 2nd. About this time, October 2nd. So I don't want to dismiss that question. But what is it like for me to experience blue, and how could you know that? By having scientific understanding. Look at his neurons. Oh, he's seeing blue. What? And it feels like this. What does anything feel like in purely scientific terms? Do we get that? That perhaps is missing here. Let me get a couple questions, then we'll move on. Yes, and then yes.
In the terms of this thought experiment, would the demon know how the universe was created? Because I feel like when people want meaning in life, or when they look for meaning, they look to religion, for example, because we already laid out like the biological ones, the economical ones. But
Those were all scientific ones on purpose, but
right.
yeah.
People want to know if there's life after death, and that kind of is dependent upon whether there's a God or not. And I
Is
feel
it?
like,
Yeah, and for many that's true. I mean, I might be a Buddhist and believe that there is life after death, there's reincarnation, but without having to rely upon the notion of a divinity. However, your point is well made. Yeah, I suppose, if that cause of the universe was itself another materialistic thing, if the cause of the universe wasn't and couldn't be explained in science, because what does science study? Physical stuff, or stuff that it's in principle empirical and quantifiable. If God is like a mind that's not physical, then not quantifiable in that sense, well, then maybe science has nothing to say about that. And therefore the demon wouldn't be able to address that question. I need to move on, so let me get two more questions.
Going off of that, would the demon then be able to, would he be able to comprehend, or he or she, whatever, comprehend that they could comprehend the universe? Would they be able to comprehend the fact that the universe is in fact comprehensible?
Otherwise, they're just like an artificial intelligence program that knows everything, but doesn't know that it knows it. So what good is knowledge if you don't know you know it?
That's where we're at right now. The universe is comprehensible, but we can't comprehend that
Is
we
it?
comprehend it. Yes.
What is the nature of reality? This is good. What is the nature of reality? Where did all this come from? Did the universe need a creator? Traditionally, these are questions for philosophy, but philosophy's dead. Fuck you. Anyway, philosophy has not kept up with modern developments in science, particularly physics. Scientists have become the bearers of the torch of discovery in our quest for knowledge, says Stephen Hawking and Mlodinow in the Grand Design. They go on. Einstein was known to have said the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. That is kind of weird. How does any of this make any sense? And why is it comprehensible? Hawking and Mlodinow add, the universe is comprehensible because it is governed by scientific laws. That is to say, its behavior can be modeled. Have we answered anything, Hawking and Mlodinow? I've forgotten Mlodinow's first name. Let's call him Mlodinow. What's the relevant question to this? Yeah.
I don't know how to answer that, but oftentimes quantum mechanics defy scientific laws.
No, it defies classical physics, I guess we would say. We wouldn't want to say it defies scientific laws because quantum mechanics is itself a science. It may defy logic. Schrödinger's cat doesn't make any sense logically. It seems to violate the law of non-contradiction. The cat is in a position of dead and alive at the same time. If you know about Schrödinger's cat, we can't go into that now, but at the very, very, very tiny, these quantum bits seem to act in a way that's indeterminate and also that seems contradictory. They seem to be doing contradictory things. And so that's tough. It's tough to model it, but the fact that we do and can utilize what we call scientific laws enables us to understand certain things. But what's the philosophical question here that Hawking seems to ignore? It relates to your question, Jack, earlier. Yes?
What's the meaning of life?
Oh, no. Well, kind of. Yes?
So like the how do these things happen, like the black hole or the beginning of the universe?
Oh, well, Hawking has a book on that. He has a book specifically on that. I believe the title is almost just that. And what is he doing in that book? Cosmology. Theorizing about the origins of everything. This is what NASA does to some extent. There's a lot of shirts here that I can appeal to. What are they doing? They are engaged in philosophy. What? Oh, there. Why are these scientific laws? But why are these scientific laws?
Why are there?
Why are there? Yeah, it doesn't. Okay, why are there scientific laws and where do they come from? That's going outside of, it seems, the realm of science. It is fascinating that scientists discover all the things that they do, but I don't think that they can answer this through merely using science. This is what Critchley is addressing. This is what Critchley's point is, I think. There was one more question, and then I want to switch to Peirce, who is going to push what will at first seem like a scientific interpretation, and maybe in a positive way. Where was the other question? Yeah, go ahead.
Even in a previous life, like robotic.
Yeah. This?
If I think of it, I'll say it.
Okay. While you're thinking of that, I want to, and I got everyone here. Anyone come in late? They're using this for the comments. Oh, let me get that. Because I want to be done with that, and I want you to brief. Did I get everyone? Morgan?
Down, Jacob.
Jacob's here. Oh, there he is. I'm sorry. And everyone else. Okay. What I want to do very briefly, normally I'll have a little bit more time, but I'm a touch behind. I want to make sure I cover all of Peirce today. I want you to discuss your reflections that you did for today. If you didn't do a reflection, don't despair. Don't jump right into Kierkegaard just yet. You cannot turn in late reflections, so those points are lost, but they're minimal points. There are a lot of these, so don't fret. The goal is to get these in. If you didn't do the first reading, that's all right, or this reading for today on the fixation of belief, make sure you do so before next class, and make sure you get the next reflection in. And the reflections, again, are not your assessing the paper or the reading and finding weaknesses in it and critiquing it. You can do that. That's not necessary. It's not evaluating it. It's not trying to figure out and tell me, giving me a highlight of everything in the paper. That's not it either. You can do that, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for how the work affects you, how you respond with it. I think it's going to be less of an issue for this class, but throughout most of my classes, getting students to read past few semesters, past few years, has been extremely difficult. And I understand time is tough. It's tough to find time to do all the readings. But I want you to focus in, maybe on a paragraph or two, or quotation, where you narrow your focus and say how it affects you, how it is interesting to you, why you find it interesting, showing me that you grapple with the text. Therefore, you thereby having something to discuss, finding a connection that is of interest to you, which will foster your curiosity, which will foster your greater focus, which will also make you get more out of it, and you'll do better in class as a result. The first part of it is turning it in on time. If you do that, you get the half credit. If you come to class the day is due to discuss it, you get the other half credit. That's it. Very simple. If you don't turn in any assignment at all, any reflection, you get no points even if you show up. And I don't accept late reflections. Keep that in mind. That's not onerous, I think, or unfair, because there are a lot of these. So if you miss one or two, that's totally fine. All right, let's break up into groups of 3 or 4 and discuss your reflections on the reading from Peirce. Just for a little bit, introduce yourselves and all of that, and then we'll jump into the discussion. 3 or 4, so it's fine. Or 2, whatever works. Make sure everyone's in a group. All right. I know. Oh, okay, go ahead. Yeah, you're... Sorry. Few more minutes. It's a bigger group. I apologize. Cut you off. In the interest of time, I'm going to limit it just a little bit. We can break into smaller groups. I think in the future, breaking into groups of 2 and 3 is more efficient as far as getting everyone to talk. We'll do that next time. This way you get to see a little bit more people, introduce yourself to more people, so that's a benefit. But we'll also have a little bit more time. I'm a little bit behind, so let me jump right in. And I'll just use this as a kind of introduction. And I don't know if it's quite right, but you kind of get a sense of what's going on with the concept, the term of pragmatism. It comes from the root pragma, which means deed, right? And so you hear pragmatic, And practical is probably always that other term that comes to mind with pragmatism. He's a practical person. She's really pragmatic. And that implies not overly burdened with theory. Or at the very least, it implies this person's prone to action. They get things done. The opposite of that is something like this. You know, the thing where people think it's funny when they ask you, hey, could you pass the salt? And then you say, yes. It's hilarious. You're missing out on the implicature, if you want to jump ahead to H.P. Grice and his rules of logic and conversation. The practical, pragmatic effects of language, the pragmatic, practical effects of theory. What do we mean by the words that we're using? What are the practical applications? How do we have any understanding of anything? How do we access reality? The pragmatic method comes from Charles Peirce. He utilizes the word pragmatism, which he does not coin. It's found in Immanuel Kant's Critique of Practical Reason. And there Kant distinguishes pragmatism from what we might call a priorism, or the a priori method. And do you know what a priori means? Anyone? Raise your hands. Lots of people. Yes?
Before
reasoning? Not quite.
before experience.
Before experience, that's right. Prior to, let's get the word prior that might be helpful. Think of conceptual analysis. You're not going into the world. You don't need to go into the world to experience things. You can know certain things if you just understand concepts. If I know that a bachelor is an unmarried male of marrying age, I don't need to go out into the world to confirm. How would I confirm that? I know that all triangles are three-sided figures with interior angles equaling 180 degrees or whatever. I don't go into the world to discover that. That's not a discovery in the world in the sense of experience. This is a conceptual a priori truth. Almost definitional, purely conceptual. Peirce, not a fan of that rationalistic mode of justification of reason, of getting to reality. I don't want to say he's not a fan. He thinks it's insufficient if it's all that we're relying upon. Now, Peirce was a mathematician. He was trained in science. In fact, he mostly worked in the private sphere at the Geodesic Survey. He did some minor publications. In fact, some of the readings, one of the readings that you have for today was from Popular Science magazine. He has a couple of them in a row that make sense of what pragmatism is, starting as early as 1877. But it did not catch on. And he basically remained in obscurity. And he had a rough go of it. He did not have a good life for a large portion of it. And it wasn't until around 1905 when William James, who was very popular at the time, he was a trained psychologist and he taught himself philosophy. He's one of the few who self-taught in philosophy and then goes on to become a professional philosopher. In fact, I'd say perhaps one of the most well-known and influential philosophers from the United States, but popularizes Peirce's work. In fact, so much so that it upset Peirce because it was a little different. The pragmatism, they're connected. They're very similar. They're very different ideas. They're very similar ideas with respect to what meaning, how words have meaning, and what truth is, which are the things that we're focusing on in these next few readings. But Peirce didn't like James's new take on it. James, I think I have him pictured here. That's Peirce over there. Everyone had a beard back then. And now again, we're back to beards, I think. If you're not everyone. I shaved this morning, so I'm not trying to get a beard. It's just... Peirce changes the name of it. When James comes along and writes a work and does a public lecture that becomes very famous on what pragmatism is, or the meaning of pragmatism, what pragmatism is actually an earlier writing from Peirce. James uses his own language of it, what pragmatism is. Peirce doesn't like his take, doesn't like the language, the rhetoric. He kind of sees it as rhetorical and less rigid and rigorous, scientifically, logically speaking. Peirce is a logician first, a mathematician first. And as I said, he sees philosophy specifically as philosophy of science. James is trained in psychology. and very much interested in how beliefs affect our mental states, how what counts as a true belief and what we take to be a true belief is not just, as we're going to see with Peirce, what has observable, publicly available, physical manifestations. So Peirce says, all right, James, you can do pragmatism. That's your thing. That's not the same thing as mine. I'll call mine a different name. And unfortunately, he chose pragmatism. This is a terrible word, but he made that. He did that on purpose. Pragmatism, a word ugly enough to be safe from kidnappers. Pragmatism. Pragmatism.
Because you're saying pragmatic and then you just say pragmatism.
I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. It's ugly. It's an ugly word. There's no doubt. And he did it on purpose. So James borrowed heavily from him. But you're going to notice that James is more prone toward the psychological and open to the metaphysical. And what is metaphysical? What is metaphysics, by the way? Who knows what metaphysics is? Go ahead.
It's everything. I forget. Is it the
If it is everything, then we will have difficulty discussing this. This is metaphysics.
It's the most.
Well, okay, yeah, everything. That's interesting. That's you're onto it. Yes.
Like the nature of reality?
It's in the most general sense. What is the nature of reality? That's a metaphysical question. That's right. Yes.
I read this thing about Charles Peirce that said like he decided to call his stuff pragmatism because he didn't want to be associated with the degenerate views of his followers. And then it ended with
right.
He died a bitter man in 1914.
Yeah, he did. And he only became his ideas though did become somewhat degenerate. Yeah. His ideas did become received once they were put in the mouth of William James, who was a way better writer than Henry James, his brother. It's a pretty impressive family. But the writing in his principle of psychology, who's taking psychology? You probably read something from James. His principle of psychology over 100 years ago is still a useful and worthy textbook for the science of psychology today, I would argue. And a lot of his arguments come from Peirce. He owes a huge debt, and he does give him props. He actually gave him money too.
For his debts?
Yeah, but anonymously, because James didn't want Peirce to know that he was giving him money, because then it would feel kind of crappy, and so he wouldn't have taken it, wouldn't have accepted it. So James helped him in many ways. But how is it that we know that James gave him money anonymously? Clearly, it wasn't anonymous. We all now know how great James was, which may have been his intention all along. Yeah.
The Curb Your Enthusiasm video.
That's right. That's similar to that, where Larry David donates a wing, which is good to donate, a wing of a building, give money for it, and then have your name on it. But then on the other wing of the same building, somebody donated money, and it was anonymous. But everyone knew, because he told the right people, that it was Ted Danson. If you know Curb Your Enthusiasm, you'll know that episode. So Ted Danson, everybody knows he's so great because he donated, and he didn't want the recognition, and yet he got the recognition, plus the recognition for not being recognized. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. All right, let's get into his conception of pragmatism. Ideas have meaning. What do we mean by meaning? Beliefs, thoughts. Ideas have meaning or truth to the extent that they produce practical results. There's that practical pragmatism connection. Practical results. And he does not focus on the psychological. And on one, I guess, like we could put it, uncharitable reading, he seems to dismiss mental states in a way that James's theory is a bit more superior, to be able to explain the inner workings of the human mind, where Peirce focuses more on observable, publicly available, quantifiable information. And maybe we'll see when we get into philosophy of consciousness and mind. In particular, Patricia Churchland's Can Neurobiology Teach Us Anything About Consciousness? I think Peirce would find would have a sympathetic reading of that, where she's going to argue we can get a reductive understanding of consciousness, for example, through science. and we can understand mental states. Let me just give you, and you have access to these slides, so if I go a little bit quick, don't worry about getting everything that's on there. Yes?
Who's the woman you just mentioned and her article?
Patricia Churchland. We'll actually read her paper September 30th.
Is this right before October 2nd?
That is, well, it's a couple of days before. It's
Oh,
a
yeah.
week before. No, a couple, I don't know. But yes, here's what seems significant to us, that goes back to the variation on the Laplace's demon that I gave you before, that I focused on. Our idea of anything is our idea of its, notice this, sensible effects. And that's it. Anything beyond that, he'll actually call meaningless. If a word cannot be tied to observable practical results, it's meaningless. So if you want to understand what soluble means, think of it in terms of an operational definition, where you can, even if you don't have the materials with you, you can't test it in an empirical lab, you can still go through the operational procedure in your mind to understand that these tablets have the disposition, what do I want to say? They are disposed to dissolve if put through this process. What does it mean for something to be hard, is an example he uses. Well, it's something that would not be scratched or damaged by something, by some other object. And another object that would be scratched by this first object would not be considered hard, or I think it was the term he was using. He uses soluble as an example. And he uses this as a kind of test case, so to speak, for what constitutes meaning. Yeah.
What would be an example of something that is meaningless in his sense?
He does mention metaphysics.
Oh.
Something specific.
Well, think of a metaphysical question about, transubstantiation.
Okay, I don't know what that means.
Anyone heard of transubstantiation? Yes?
Isn't that the Catholic belief that the material used in communion literally becomes the blood and...
The wine become...
Yeah.
Oh, time out. What's the temperature at?
74.
It stops at 74. That's not good enough.
And the class.
How does it feel?
I
No,
like
It's okay right now? In a few minutes, it's going to warm up again. So if you could, I don't know, fiddle with it. And just hit the button, the lower button. Already it feels hot. Maybe it's just psychological. Is it doing anything?
Says restricted.
Okay, hit the power button again. Okay, now try it. Anything?
67.
Okay, let's wait.
Oh wait, it went back up.
Oh, but it came back on. That's all we needed to do. Okay, thank you. Question was transubstantiation. Body and blood. This is the body and blood of Christ. Is it meant to be metaphorical?
No. Okay.
So he would say, this is not something that's testable. This is not something that has observable practical results. James might disagree because the practical results may not be observable to me, but to a Catholic, a fervent Catholic who takes communion, that may have effects that are not...
Would the emotional effect of that have a physical effect from the behavior?
That would be
Oh, yeah.
that would be a charitable interpretation of Peirce, who could then say, if I'm Percy, and I might say, well, by practical observable effects, I mean, look at how this person, this devout Catholic, behaves, reacts around communion, and because of this practice, does it have observable effects in their behavior? That would be. This is another precursor. That's why pragmatism is such an interesting starting point, because it is a precursor to a lot in analytic philosophy, a lot in experiential or phenomenological philosophy, and we'll see with philosophy of mind what's something called behaviorism, right? I can't get into your mind, I can't see your mental states, but I can observe your behavior. I can observe how a religious person behaves. Now, if I say I'm religious, but you can't tell my behavior, I'm religious, and I'm a moral person because I'm religious. Well, if you can't distinguish my behavior from an atheist who's also a moral person, then James might question whether or not it's the religiosity that plays any role in those beliefs. Yes, and then yes.
Just remember, like, my earlier question has something to do with, like, how how like decades ago or hundreds of years ago, like we didn't know that the mind, like we thought the mind and the body was like two different things, or the mind and the brain, but then like as research like furthers, like we realize that a lot of the things that happen in the mind is actually like observable in physical things that happen in the brain.
That's a question I'm afraid we'll have to wait until we get to, again, September 30th and October 2nd. We will get to, because it isn't the case that there is agreement on just what the mind is, or that dualism, your initial decades, hundreds of years ago, that substance dualism is dismissed. Not everyone agrees with that even today. Some still, even scientists, even philosophers of mind, advocate for a version of dualism. But I can't address that in detail at the moment. Let me get,
I have a question before the question real quick.
You have a question before the question?
No, I have a question before the question.
Can I use two questions?
I've got two questions.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't know.
Just, it's kind of confusing me, the second dot.
This one?
Yeah, like so does that just work with any word? So if I say, like the first dude who's like, this is a tree, as long as he can go, this is a tree right here, does that mean that word is meaningful? Because it's kind of weird with the example like soluble, is like, that's kind of like, we can see that these things are soluble, but what if it's just like, this is a number? Is that
Yes, and by the way, this gets into philosophy of language too, and the importance of language and meaning of one word. Really, what does one word mean? Technically, nothing. Words have meaning only in context of sentences. Beliefs are only meaningful to the extent that they're connected with other. Nobody has one belief. You don't start as an infant with one belief and then you add another belief. It's impossible for that to work. This concept of tying the word notebook to that object already requires an understanding of a number of different things. So it's not like we have no words and then, boom, notebook. Because now there's already a thing that you're pointing to, whatever it may be. You're using something called ostension. That already assumes beliefs. So if you're talking to me and you say notebook, that already assumes a belief that you understand that I can understand your words and I know what you're pointing at, and this object is used, jump to a guy named Wittgenstein, which we'll get to, whatever it says on the syllabus. It's used in a collective way, in a consistent way, and in Peirce's sense, it has meaningful, observable reactions. It leads to habituation of action. If I believe that's a notebook, that would be borne out in my dispositions. If that's a notebook, then here are the actions I would engage in with it. I would take notes with it. I would read it. If you saw me with that, and I was trying to ride home on it, why isn't it going? That would be evidence that I don't believe it's a notebook. I believe it's a hoverboard or something, and I'm mistaken in that case.
The following question to that, a little more intricate, is like, because I was thinking about the word God and the concept of God. There isn't exactly like a verdict on whether that's a practical thing, whether God is real or this or that.
Yep.
So, but people like use the word God practically. It has meaning to people, but it's not necessarily like, it's not something we can prove.
Like observable?
It's not observable. But it's kind of practical. It has meaning to people.
There's a distinction between James and Peirce. James will say, in fact, I had that,
Like
one of his
practical
comments
stuff is
was something like, faith in fact helps create the fact. There you see more of a sympathy with religious or theological metaphysics. Metaphysics is basically, I never really defined that, basically the study of everything. It is trying to get at what Aristotle calls the first science. It is questioning the nature of reality. Whereas physics assumes reality is material stuff, physical stuff. Metaphysics asks, what is the nature of reality? A psychologist assumes, presupposes without argument, that mental states are, or psychological states are, have these certain features. The metaphysical question is, are mental states physical, or are they non-physical? Are mental states possible without physical instantiation? Do we have free will? Does God exist? And so on. Those are metaphysical questions. And some of them, if they're not prone to, as Peirce puts it, if they don't have practical results, and if they cannot be tied to observable practical results, then we're dealing with meaningless questions. And then you have an extreme, an even more drastic and extreme version of this with A.J. Ayer and something called logical positivism. All right, 1, 2, 3. 3. Remember your numbers, and then we got to move on. Go ahead.
Isn't this very limiting? As basically, if we just don't initially perceive something as observable material, and we just put it off, and then later on we figure out, oh, it is. Isn't that just basically?
Yes. That's what, who had asked that question earlier. Does he mean science as it is now or in the future? So it's science going forward, practically observable. It may be the case that now we don't have the capacity to see mental states. We can see neurons firing. We can see the blood flow of our brains so far as where thinking's happening in a particular situation. That's very different than saying, there's a thought and here's how we can capture the feeling of that thought and so on. But what Peirce is saying is that we will eventually converge on truth. And he's going to say the only way of doing that, of fixing belief and avoiding and getting away from doubt, is the method of science. And he says eventually we're in fact, he even sometimes uses language like we're fated, which is very odd that he does this. We're fated or destined to achieve this kind of convergence. And we might find some discontinuity or inconsistency with that view. Yeah.
So neurotheology looks at the brain. We've actually talked about looks at the brain on God, essentially. So
this is your brain on drugs, and this is your brain on God, and this is your, yes, sure.
If that's observable, would that be considered pragmatic?
Very good, James. I don't think Peirce would say that, but James would. And I'll just jump ahead to James. James would say one of the practical effects might be how one reacts to holding a particular belief. If I believe in God, does it have practical effects in my life for me with respect to meaning and purpose? Peirce doesn't seem to concern himself as much with that. So there's a fundamental difference between the two. And one more question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, on the subject of God being meaningful, James is just saying that people practicing religion, in itself, is an observable practical result. So that's why it would give it meaning.
To those people. To those people.
But only to those people.
He does not jump to the conclusion that because I, for instance, have a religious experience that is wholly illuminative and absolutely true and noetic, as he puts it, for me, that therefore you have to accept what I'm saying. He doesn't. It's authoritative for the person who has the experience. But he doesn't want to discount that experience. However, it seems Peirce does. And we get to this, I'm going to jump through a few things here. This is the opening lines, which you don't have in your reading. I think this reading is cut up a little bit. You don't have the full text. Few persons care to study logic because everybody conceives himself to be proficient enough in the art of reasoning already, but I observe that this satisfaction is limited to one's own thinking or ratiocination. And I think part of this is tied to his drive to avoid the historical modes of fixing or establishing belief. Fixing belief has a kind of rigidity to it. But in the end, that's going to be the sole inquiry, the sole end of inquiry or study, is to settle or fix our opinions. Because when we're in a state of doubt, it's uncomfortable. We don't like it. And by doubt, he doesn't mean, as we're going to see, what he'll call paper doubt, or what does he call pretend doubt. But he means genuine doubt. And here, he's engaged in a viewpoint that's similar to what was starting around the same time as his writing, with a guy in Germany named Edmund Husserl, called phenomenology. There is a phenomenological difference. There is a way you experience, from the first-person perspective, the mental state that we call belief and the mental state we call doubt. They're fundamentally different. And we may not think about this much, but I like the way he puts it. I don't want to give that away just yet, but I like the way that he's going to put this. the goal is to get, and think about all the beliefs that we have. We have, I'll oftentimes reference this, our WOBs. What do we get out? It's 340, right? So we have in our web of beliefs just an amazing number of beliefs, so many beliefs. And our question is, what establishes the truthfulness of these beliefs? And do you think that most of our beliefs are true? I was going to go into a thing where I used to believe that all squirrels are brown, but I changed that view. I didn't hold on to it tenaciously. And I think that Peirce doesn't address so many trivial beliefs. This is a kind of trivial belief, right? My web of beliefs, all squirrels are brown. That's what I thought when I lived in California. And then I moved to Middle America in Illinois. I found a non-brown squirrel. Here's an example.
Did you take that?
No, I did not. So they're just playing. And clearly, and then I immediately changed my belief. I changed it based upon my own experience. But this is not how so many of our beliefs, in particular maybe our core beliefs, the beliefs that we hold that are cherished beliefs, they're not so easy to change. This is on the periphery, all squirrels are brown. Oh, really? Here's evidence that they're not. Oh, thank you for showing me that. I changed my mind. But you tell me that, I don't know, what's a core belief, just in general, somebody might have?
I exist.
Yeah, that's a pretty big one. I was trying to find ways around that. If I change that, that's kind of connected to a lot of these other beliefs. Turns out, whoa, maybe I don't exist. But really, is that a genuine doubt? Do I really exist? What is it like to genuinely experience and feel doubt? Have you ever felt that you didn't exist? To jump to Descartes, who he's attacking with his conception of a paper doubt. He calls what Descartes is doing with his doubting, paper doubting. Doubting it on paper, writing out, what if I didn't really exist? Is it possible to doubt this? Peirce thinks that that's ridiculous. You can't clear the slate and just start as if you didn't have any of these beliefs. You can't do that. You go in, so to speak, in the middle already with a bunch of beliefs that you're pretty satisfied about, in the sense that there's no feeling of doubt. And by feeling of doubt, I mean like the first day of class. You don't know which room we're in. Are we in room 105, WCC? Or is it the IDC 105, which is a legitimate example because I messed up your syllabi in this very class. And when I looked at that and then looked at the banner or whatever it is on Pipeline, I felt doubt. And it was very uncomfortable.
Wait, so you can like reintroduce or introduce doubt to a belief that you already have? So isn't that what Descartes is doing?
You can reintroduce.
So you were like believing that this was the classroom, and then you saw it on a piece of paper, and then you said, maybe it's not.
It's either WCC 105 or IDC 105. There is a fact of the matter. And I didn't know which one. That genuine feeling of, oh my God. Have you ever felt that? Where, do I have a test in this class? Do I have a test today, or is it another day? Once you feel that doubt, Peirce tells us, you have admitted, oh, there is a reality. Because if you believe there is no real one single reality, then your feelings of doubt wouldn't make any sense. You would never feel any doubt if you didn't think there was a single real world independent of your mind. It's a really interesting argument. But that feeling of doubt, that feeling of surprise is illuminating because you realize the world is confronting you in a way that it wouldn't if it were true that the world is a multiplicity, that there are no facts of the matter. So he is not a relativist. He is not somebody who says, reality is what you make it. Appearances are reality. And I'm going to jump ahead. James doesn't say it quite that way either. He says further, for truth, this is not what you had to read, but I wanted to get a little bit at this first. Truth is neither more nor less than the character of a proposition that consists in the belief that the proposition would, with sufficient experience and reflection, lead us to such conduct as would tend to satisfy the desires. Boy, it goes on for a bit. This goes back to the dispositions to act. How, if I believe that the wafer I'm given in the service was truly the body of Christ, how would that come out in my behavior? And what would I behave, in what ways would I behave if I held this belief? It's a very early version of what is sometimes called behaviorism. We can't get into your mental states, but we can publicly observe your behaviors. And that's all that we mean by these concepts. So what is a belief? It is something that is observable, and it is something that gets upset by what he calls the irritation of doubt, which is the privation of a habit. In his language, kind of odd language, a habit rules for action. It is a means of removing doubt. Because doubt is uncomfortable.
What is privation?
A lack of. Privation. Yeah. A lack of. Think about doubt, its sense of unease. And there's some benefits to this, and he's not discounting. He's not saying you should never ever feel doubt, because that is what we drive for with the first three modes. Tenacity in particular. It feels nice to feel like you're right. It's uncomfortable to realize you might not be. Real quick, and then here.
Can doubt be like documented then? If you can't like do an action with doubt,
Documented?
like written about?
By you? I'm not by the individual?
Like if I'm feeling doubt, can I write about the doubt that I'm feeling?
Why not? Sure. I suppose.
But isn't that like an action or?
Yes. Peirce would have no problem with that. In a way, thinking in a broad conception of action, thought is a kind of action. Especially from a materialistic perspective, if thoughts just are neurons firing. That's just brain action, brain activity. And you writing that out is a representation of that. I think Peirce would be fine with that. Yes?
It says privation. What about deprivation? Is there a difference?
If I'm deprived of oxygen, if I'm deprived of it, that oftentimes means somebody has taken it away. Privation doesn't necessarily imply that.
It just means lack.
Lack of, in this case. That's right. Did I see another hand? All right. I've got 6 minutes. I'm going to talk fast. No. What is doubt? It's the uneasy or dissatisfied state. To have a doubt is to not know how to act. This is already covered this. It's in contrast with paper doubt. I don't know how to act. I'm uncertain. If I believe, I'm certain. He even actually references extreme views of believers, going back to an earlier medieval text, dealing with certain people who were extremists. They acted in such a way that led to the deaths of other people and themselves. What Peirce says is, they did that because they were damn sure. Rarely do people die or kill when they're doubtful, because doubt leads you to not be sure, not quite sure how to act. And so there is a concern that we glom onto a belief that we just assume to be true. In fact, he even says this. We typically believe things because we think they're true. And in fact, it's a mere tautology. Is this the next slide? No, it isn't. It's a mere tautology to say, I believe this claim is true. It's the same, to say that I believe it is to say that you think it is true. And I'll talk about what tautology is in a moment. Real quick, we gotta...
Like Catholicism, they say like doubt is part of faith. Like you have to not be sure that it's true, but like still act like it's true anyway.
That's potentially contradictory and complex, and I can't get into that now. There's the concern of pride. This goes back to Augustine. You have to both believe and have faith, but also not so much certainty that you know you're going to be saved, because that leads to pride. And so there's got to be a middle ground in those mental states, and that's too big of an issue here, I think. Yeah.
Real quick, I would ask everyone to consider if it's possible to believe that you're happy without actually being happy. And I would enter that as proof that belief has a transcendent quality over reality.
Believe that you're happy, so fool yourself, fake it
Until you make it.
until you make it. And if that works, like if I don't believe I'm happy, if I'm not happy, but if I start believing it,
aren't you happy?
you can choose to believe it.
What I'm saying is that the belief has a transcendent quality over, in this case, the neurons in your brain. If you believe that you are happy, that is the same as being happy, right?
Yes, but you have then you're getting into the epistemological question of how beliefs work, and can beliefs work in such a way that they can be chosen.
Well, what I'm saying is maybe if a Catholic believes, that's the bread and water That's the
Yeah.
blood and body of Christ. Could it be the blood and body of Christ?
Well, now
If there are any
that's
Catholics in the room, they would say yes.
yes. Peirce would say meaningless. James would say we can't close that off. We don't, to borrow from Peirce's own language, we don't want to close off avenues of inquiry. And that's why James is so interested in religious experience. That's why James is so interested in metaphysical musings with respect to theology and belief in God, because of the practical effects it has on the individual. But there's more we have to say about that. And what you're addressing is a really interesting question of what is the nature of belief, and is it something that you can choose? In some cases, it would be absurd to think that, because I really wished I could fly. And there's a song about that. I believe I can fly. Sorry. But that's not enough, which you will learn very quickly as you try to spread your wings. But that's a different kind of, perhaps, mental state than I believe in free will or something. Well, what are the arguments? Well, I'm jumping ahead to James, but note, I want you to consider that. Can I choose to believe certain things? I want to believe that this table is not here. I don't know if I can choose that. Belief just confronts me in Peirce's sense. There's certain things that I cannot genuinely doubt. Likewise, it seems, there are things that I cannot genuinely believe. Even if I want to. Notice belief and desire or hope are different mental states. A desire or a hope is what the American philosopher John Searle would call a world-to-mind fit, direction of fit. When I desire something, I hope for something, I want to make the world fit my mental state. When I believe something, I'm trying to get my mental state to fit the world. Do you see? A mind-to-world fit. And so those are different things. However, James looks at the possibility that even beliefs might be such that they can change the way the world is. I believe we did not cover as much as I wanted, as I hoped, as I desired. We are out of time. There's no way. Yes?
Are we going to discuss that James thing you just said for the next book?
It depends.
Okay.
I still got more Peirce. It's making me purse my lips in anger. You get it? Peirce. All right. Okay. Yeah. No. Come on. I didn't even finish.
It doesn't matter. It's
Yeah.
every class, no
Wow.
matter what, right?
So, I've got a lot to do for next time. If you haven't read Peirce, please do so. James, Pragmatism, it's a little bit longer. And I hope to have a quiz in class. We'll see. I may have to push that off to individual work outside of class. And then on Wednesday, Frege. His is a very difficult reading, so you may want to start on that one this weekend as well. All right, take care.
I was really interested in what you said about the whole Descartes having to presuppose like an existence or a reality outside of him.
One second, let me make sure I don't forget where I am. All right, what was it now? I'm sorry.
The whole Peirce's argument against Descartes about having
paper
to
down?
perceive like a reality outside, like why doubt?
Uh-huh.
I'm confused.
What Descartes is doing is pretending to doubt his senses.
Yeah.
He doesn't literally doubt them. He's actually doing that as a kind of method to see if he can achieve a degree of certainty. What he's doing is saying, how far can I doubt such that I get to a point where if I were to doubt this, it would be absurd, it would be contradictory, it would be logically impossible. So he's actually just pretending, or in more kind language, he's engaged in a thought experiment. He's meditating on this. He doesn't literally believe that the senses deceive him all the time. He doesn't literally believe that he's dreaming. He doesn't literally believe there's an evil demon and so forth. Because you can't. That's not genuine doubt. Genuine doubt feels different than than a fake doubt.
Yeah. And the methodology of it. Right?
The phenomenology of
Yeah.
it, the way things are experienced. My belief that classes in this room or that we have a test this day will drive my action. My doubt as to where or when it is freezes me. It's like, oh my God, and I feel not just irritation, but tension and anxiety, which is not the case with the fixation of belief. The question now is, what is the best means to fix that belief that gets us closer to true beliefs? Yes?
I was just gonna, I had like half credit on the last reflection.
Were you not here for the discussion?
No, I was. I was late, but
You were here for the discussion?
I was here for the discussion.
He was, I talked to him.
Ah, good. So I think that I must have missed you on the attendance, and that's why I did not.
That's what I was.
Yes.
Real
'cause
quick,
that-
I
you
did
have to
check.
be
The
here.
next reflection is Wednesday, right? Not this upcoming Monday? It's the 16th, I believe, or the 11th. The 11th. It's a week from now, right?
I don't know.
I'd have to look online.
As
I think
I
there's.
think it is, because I just checked before this class and I wanted to ask
Okay,
if that was
let
a
me
mistake
make
or not.
sure first with.
No, yeah, sorry, didn't mean to jut in. We were just talking about reflections anyway. And you said Wednesday.
Logan, right?
Meeting.
Yep. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I got you. You're good. So let me see. The next reflection is.
I believe it's the 11th. A week from now, Wednesday.
Reflection on Frege, the 11th, that's right, Frege
Awesome.
and Frankfurt. So there's no reflection on James, because I intended to do group work in class, and I don't want
on
to
the
overlap.
Monday, yeah.
Okay.
Oh wait,
Oh, yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
sorry. I did want
Sorry?
to ask if you could, because I know you said the slides are posted, but every time I've checked, it's not until after the class that they're posted. And I really like to review before and pre-take notes so I can pay more attention to what you're saying, because I just am
Yeah,
the one with the computer and I always feel bad, so I sit in the back of the class anyway to type.
don't have them.
No, it says that they're there, just because
Yes.
I can't have access to them until the class ends at 3:40.
Oh,
Yeah, and I was just wondering-
I typically I amend them all the time, but I
Okay.
can probably, if I
Just before
Maybe
the
an
class.
hour
Yeah,
at
that's
most.
fine. That's honestly fine. That's all I
email me
need.
to remind me to do
Okay,
that next
thank you.
class.
Just
That
because
shouldn't
I
be a
was
problem.
wondering, and even in class, I like to sometimes, instead of
Oh, yeah.
stopping the whole class to rewind a slide,
Sure,
you
no,
know,
that makes
just look it
sense.
up. All right, thank you so much.
Uh-huh.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too? Yes.
So I was supposed to be taking another class. It was web design, and it was my last class for. I'm trying to get it substituted for this class, but
Okay.
right here it says. I just read this and it says. I think I need to get assigned by the chair of philosophy.
That's not me.
That's Mark.
That's Mark Bobro. He's near my office, 350. It's mine's 352. His is just to the left. You'll see it, Bobro. So he would be the one in IDC.
In IDC.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
I had a couple questions. I didn't want to bring it up because you kept having a bunch of questions.
That's all right.
They're kind of basic. I'm a person, when I read philosophy, I like to translate it into my own language, as William James did. An idea that we talked about, or a literal quote that was said, it said, "Faith, in fact, helps create the fact." I had a mental idea. Does that mean that? Okay, believing. Wait, does that mean that he believes that facts or truths can be relative, like the idea of absolute truths and relative truths? Is he a believer of that?
Very good question, and I can't answer that shortly. So relativism James's does seem to lead to relativism in a way that
definitely has
Peirce's does not. Peirce's
Yes.
are worried about that. But the language of James, and this is one of the reasons Peirce said, you know what, let's not call what you're doing, James, pragmatism.
Yeah.
Or rather, I'm not going to, you can have the word pragmatism. I'm going to do
change it, yeah.
pragmaticism, because I don't like this rhetoric that you're using. It's too fluid, too open, in a way, he doesn't use this relativistic, but it does imply that.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the question that was raised by Isaac with the transubstantiation. If you believe it, it can become true. And there are certain things in which that's trivially the case.
Yeah.
There are certain things that you can, if you want, fool yourself into believing. But that specific issue, we're going to come back to next class with James.
Last question,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll let you go. It was another saying, if a word cannot be tied to observable, that's the word I kind of zoomed in, observable practical results, it's meaningless. Is that kind of going along with the empirical view that what you experience through your senses is pretty much what leads to knowledge?
James is a scientist, Peirce is a scientist, and empiricism, scientific method applying to physical material reality is implied in the background.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Awesome. I just wanted to double check that.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay. Enjoy your day.
Yep. You too.
I don't know if it's a fair question or not, but how do you distinguish between important questions and hopelessly pedantic ones?
Ha!
That's another question
Yeah.
I should ask too.
Because I'm having trouble doing that when people ask questions here.
Okay, the typical example is So in the medieval period, there was a question, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Well, that seems like a ridiculous thing to question and waste our time with. Of course, it misses some of the points of the conceptual analysis. The question of what counts as a legitimate and important question, that may be relative to the individual. When we get to analytic philosophy after James, Frege is going to focus on meaning, and he's going to focus on sense and reference and very detailed, specific construction of language and how it connects with reality. And we'll see this with Bertrand Russell focusing narrowly on how language maps onto reality and how logic can undergird language. And we get into that question we started with, what's the meaning of meaning? That sounds pedantic. That sounds, well, is that really? In fact, that's what Neil deGrasse Tyson said on one of his public posts. Philosophers of science in particular are useful. They're always worried about the meaning of meaning, for example. So from his perspective, that question is pedantic and trivial. What was the term you used?
I think I said hopelessly pedantic.
Hopelessly pedantic and unimportant. You're just splitting hairs. You're just talking to other professional philosophers who only deal with that very narrow issue. And you've missed the importance of how this particular study may affect, to go back to Critchley, may affect philosophy at large and other people. I'm afraid I've got to get to my next class. But no, it's a legitimate question. And it's one that Critchley has in the background of the difference between knowledge and wisdom, I think. As to this class and individual questions, I like to have them. And I'm not going to be the arbiter in any clear way that says, nope, you can't ask that.
Yeah, because I don't know, I feel like there's sometimes a contrast between how you answer a question and the question is asked. Because you try to relate it to something more meaningful when the question was more like pedantic.
Possibly. That's possible. Yeah.